I now invite our first speaker, Natali Foster, to the stage to share her thoughts.
Hello. If I'm bad at speaking, it's because we need more funding for public speaking classes. So, my name is Natali Foster. I'm a senior environmental and earth science major. I'm set to graduate in December with upwards of $55,000 in debt. I grew up in Somerset, Mass, where I went to school, and nearing high school graduation, I was thinking about college and I realized I wasn't even really sure it was something that I wanted to do. I couldn't picture myself doing it at all. But I had a dad that didn't want me to spend long days on manual labor like he did, and a stepmom that was realizing that all of her new colleagues had college degrees. So my parents wanted me to go to school, which they didn't, and they couldn't help me afford to do that, but I wanted to do it. It seemed like a good decision to make based on their thoughts. So I went to Fitchburg State, and I was still unsure of what it was that I wanted to pursue as a major, as a career, and without much guidance from my family on how to navigate this unfamiliar path and these new decisions that I'd have to make. At this university and in the science building right next door is where I found the guidance that I've needed. This cohort of professors and faculty members has taught me so much, not just in the classroom, but outside of it as well. I get emotional talking about them, I'm so sorry. They have helped me to realize my passions, to decide what I want to do, and to become the person that I want to be. Their encouragement and contagious enthusiasm has shaped me into a dedicated student, a leader, and a scientist. I can stand here in front of you and say that I don't regret pursuing my bachelor degree, but that's probably because my loans are still in deferment, but it has come at a substantial cost. For my first 2 years at Fitchburg, I lived on campus working about 20 hours a week. Having received very little financial aid, I watched as my loans piled up and realized that there was no way I could keep adding this much debt every year. In order to manage it, I had to leave the dorm and move off campus after my second year. I now try to continue earning enough money to cover rent while also balancing schoolwork, my position as president of a club on campus, caring for the apartment, feeding myself, and caring for myself. Currently, I'm trying to figure out if I'll even be able to accept a summer internship that, despite being a paid position, might not offer me enough money for me to sustain the life that I need to live here, the life that I need to have here in order to continue going to school here. I have this university, my advisor, my professors, and my education to thank for so much, but it hurts to think about how much more I could have gotten out of my schooling here if so much of my time and energy didn't have to go towards covering these endless expenses. The fact that state support for public education has fallen by 31% sends a message to students that our futures aren't important and neglects the fact that students are the future. My story isn't one that's filled with tragedy. I have a roof over my head, I have parents I can turn to should I need their help, and I have faculty members that can always help as well. I'm your average good student, I'm a Massachusetts native, and I'm graduating with a public education degree and $55,000 worth of debt. I strongly urge our legislators to right this wrong, to empower us to make the most of our education, and to fund our future.
Thank you, Natali, for your heartfelt words. Our next speaker is Michael Stenson, adjunct faculty at Fitchburg State University.
I sort of feel unnecessary after what Natali just told us. But my job is to talk about the numbers. Where are we? How did we get here? So back in the 80s, it was much cheaper to come to Fitchburg State. Average tuition and fees together, $546.71 a semester. Of course, other things were cheaper then. Minimum wage was $3.35 an hour. It would take 320 hours to pay for a full year of tuition and fees in a minimum wage job. So 26 and a half hours a week in the summer. That's 12 weeks in the summer with 2 weeks off. Or working 10.6 hours a week during the school year. In 1990, though, state funding for public higher ed decreased. And so the cost nearly tripled. Went to $1,545 a semester. It stayed pretty steady that way, though, until about 2001. In 2001, you could still earn enough money in the summer to pay for your tuition and fees. It would take 430 hours now. So it's a 35.8 hour a week in the summer, or 14.3 hours a week while in school. Doable, a little bit more. Right? 2001, however, is when the state started decreasing funding for higher ed significantly. So in 2001, $12,500 per student was the funding. 2018, down $4,000 a student to $8,500. Where do you suppose that $4,000 came from? We had to make it up somehow, so we charged the students. So you can see, this year, we're up to $5,132 a semester, 3.5 times as much as in 2001. The New England Board of Higher Education says that Massachusetts has the fastest rising cost of public higher education in the nation. We're the state that prides ourselves on education, and we are supporting it the least in some way. So now it's impossible to earn enough in the summer at a minimum wage job to pay for a year of school. It takes you have to work almost 80 hours a week during the summer. And that, like, who can do that? Or 31 hours a week during the school year, which a number of my students are doing. Why don't they have enough time to do homework? Because they're always at work trying to pay for things, as Tally just told us about. Meanwhile, while the cost increased, the state also decreased funding for scholarships for financial aid. $150 million in 2001, down to $102 million in 2018. Those are inflation-adjusted numbers. So, for example, tuition and fees in the 80s, 80% were covered by Mass Grant. It's less than 10% since 2011. So, of course, with costs increasing and financial aid down, we've expected our students to make up the difference in loans. Average student debt for a graduate of a 4-year public higher ed institution in the state was $17,000 in 2004, and just 12 years later, it's up to $30,250. That's for all the 4-year public higher ed. For Fitchburg State alone, 55% of our graduates in 2005 had student loans. Their average debt was $10,660. That probably sounds pretty good compared to now. In 2016, 84% of our grads had student loans. Average debt, $26,684. It's going up like crazy. And it's not getting better so far. In 2004, ranking the states, Massachusetts had the second lowest average student loan debt. 12 years later, we're the 10th highest. So, that's pretty much it. That's the numbers. Kind of boring, but stark.
Thank you, Michael, for that informative presentation. I now invite Matthew Murphy, student Matthew Murphy, to take the stage.
Thank you, everybody, for coming here today. I'm Matthew Murphy. I'm a political science student here in my 3rd year at Fitchburg State University. I wrote some remarks, but I haven't timed them, so if I talk for too long, I gave a couple of people permission to start throwing things at me. So if you see a pen fly by, it means I'm talking too much. When Alex asked me to speak here today, I was reminded of a time where I testified in front of a panel of state legislators, not legislatures, about my experience paying for my higher education, and about the student loan bill of rights that was before the State House at that time. And while I could tell that same story here today, the truth of the matter is that in terms of paying for higher education, I am extremely fortunate. I have 2 parents who both graduated college themselves and who are financially willing and able to assist me with paying for my higher education experience. And while this is not a perfect situation, I'm still going to graduate thousands of dollars in debt for student loans. I have been far more lucky than several of the people here today and hundreds of the people here at this campus. So many people have a family that is unwilling or unable to provide financial support for their education. Students take on multiple jobs to attempt to pay for their higher education, and they take on thousands and thousands of dollars in public and private loans just so they can get a degree here at Fitchburg State. Sometimes these students don't finish their education because of the high cost that they face every single year. Do these students leave this university thousands of dollars in debt because they did not work hard enough or because that they did not want it enough? I don't think that's the case. I don't think the people who are out there working 2 jobs, working 40 hours a week, going to school full-time, want their degree any less than somebody like me who had a family who could pay for it. This, to me, is fundamentally un-American. We've created a system where we have a birth lottery, where those who are born into a family who with the financial means to pay for their education have a better time getting a degree than those who work just as hard, if not harder, to receive their education. The person who spoke before me, I'm sorry, I don't remember your name, he offered some numbers about how higher education has almost tripled in price in the past few decades. And these numbers are mirrored across the nation. This is a problem that we're facing across this country. But the higher education, the quality we're receiving here at Fitchburg State is not 3 times better than what people were receiving just 10 years ago. We are paying more and more to receive an education that is remaining the same quality. And anybody who majors in economics or business can tell you that that's a bad investment. Another number that I like to throw out whenever I'm talking about higher education is 72%. Georgetown University estimates that by 2020, the end of next year, 72% of jobs in the Commonwealth of Massachusetts will require at least an associate's degree, if not higher. This is something that we have to confront now. It is a complete reversal of prior trends. When just over 10 years ago, 66% of the jobs across this country did not require a degree in higher education. And yet, the university can attest that less and less students enroll each passing year. I'm sure those of you who came in my freshman class can remember being in a forced triple in Russell Towers. Well, now they're struggling to fill student housing here on campus. I don't think more and more people are opting out of higher education because it's becoming less and less valuable. I think more and more people are looking at the cost of higher education and thinking that is too much for me to handle. That is too much for me to be burdened myself with. So these people choose to gamble their futures in a job market with just a high school diploma in a market that increasingly needs something more. The Cherish Act we're discussing here today wasn't going to fix all of this, but it's a good first start for something that we should have done decades ago. Freezing tuitions and fees for the next few years and increasing the amount of money that the state government is putting into our higher education is a necessary first step to making sure that the people in this room and that the people graduating high school in a few months will be able to afford to continue their education. To the public servants who have graced us with their time and lent us their ears, I ask you to support this act. I ask you to lobby your colleagues and garner the necessary support to pass this bill. Wager your careers on it if you have to, because this is a problem that we cannot afford to keep putting off. As inflation goes up across this country and the amount that the state funds continues to go down, the problem is only going to get worse and worse. We can't bury our heads in the sand and pretend that this is going to sort itself out. Thank you all for listening to me up here on my soapbox.
Thank you, Matthew, for sharing your story with us. I next invite the President of the Association of Professional Administrators, Sherry Coranopolis, to say a few words.
Good afternoon, everybody. Just a public service announcement, because everybody here knows that I am the Information Security Officer here at Fitchburg State. Whenever I get a crowd like this, I like to say, please don't click on those links in the email. Enough said. Moving on. It may depress some of you, especially students here in the audience, to know how old I am. I'm not going to tell you, but I will tell you that I got a full scholarship to my first year at Mass Art when I left high school and went to school, and that scholarship was $525, and it covered my entire year. I moved on after that to a 3 more years at a private institution, and my total education cost me and my parents $4,500. So I can tell you right now, that's hardly a tenth of what you are paying in fees and costs for education these days. And I can also tell you that I don't make 10 times what my father made in the days that he was helping me pay for my education. So I can feel how hard it is for all of you and how important it is to really get a little bit of control of this. I think we often spend some time thinking that this is a fairly new subject of discussion, but it really isn't. And I think that the cost and value of education is as old as this country. It was a discussion that emanated from our founding fathers. So I wanted to share a few quotes with you about those conversations. The founding fathers knew that publication was at the heart of democracy, and the first quote is actually from Benjamin Franklin. A Bible and a newspaper in every house, a good school in every district, all studied and appreciated as they merit, are the principal support of virtue, morality, and civil liberty. The whole people must take upon themselves the education of the whole people and be willing to bear the expenses of it, wrote John Adams. There should not be a district of 1 mile square without a school in it, not founded by charitable individual, but maintained at the public expense of the people themselves. That's from John Adams. Thomas Jefferson, witness to the Revolution, drafter of the Declaration of Independence and founder of the nation's first public university, rightfully believed that it was the government and the citizenry's duty to invest tax dollars in public education. The tax which would be paid for this purpose, education, is not more than 1,000th part of what would be paid to kings, priests, and nobles who will rise up amongst us if we leave the people in ignorance. That's a pretty current quote. The Cherish Act, along with the Promise Act, aimed to address the underfunding of Massachusetts public education and was widely accepted as the best state by all measures for education in the United States. To maintain this prestigious position and realize the goals of those founders of this country, the Fund Our Future campaign must be supported, and I hope we'll eventually get this check for $14 million here at Fitchburg State. Thank you.
Thank you for sharing those wonderful quotes, Sherry, and your valuable insights. Next, I invite Michaela Vick to share her experiences as a student.
Hi, my name is Michaela Vick, and I'm a junior English education major, so I don't have quotes or statistics or numbers or anything like that. But for me to be able to be here today at Fitchburg State in my third year is something that's completely crazy for me to believe, because my mom passed away when I was little, and my dad makes below the poverty line, so there was no extra funding to put towards a college education fund for me for my future. So for me to get to this position and pay for my schooling was wow, I can't believe I made it this far. But with the help of my extended family who have children about my age, they helped me apply for loans and make myself in positions where I could get extra funding for the time being. So I was like, all right, sounds good, I'll take out those loans, I'll get my education, because becoming a teacher is the only thing I want to do for the rest of my life. It's my dream career, and I honestly can't wait for when I'm going to be able to be a teacher. But as the time comes closer for me to graduate, those student debt, those loans, they keep coming in the back of my mind, how am I actually going to pay those off? How am I actually going to afford those? Because we all know teachers don't really make a lot of money. But with everything else and loans aside, being a student, I don't have time to work a full-time job. I don't have time to work 20, 30 hours a week, because I take 5 classes. I have to do 65 hours a semester in a high school to learn how to be a teacher. So as well as my loans and the debt that I'm going to be in, I'm also struggling for paying for my books, because this semester alone, $300 I had to drop on books. I have to pay for my MTEL, which is a licensure to become a teacher. That's over $130. And then there's the constant need of gas, groceries, and all of that stuff. I lowered my meal plan because I couldn't afford the one that Fitchburg State has to offer for the Freedom Meal Plan, so I have to buy groceries. That's an added cost every single week. So there's so much worry and stress about my financial status as a student, and personally I feel it shouldn't be. And for the incoming students, the incoming people going to college, I feel like that they deserve to not be as stressed out as we are now, and we are trying to fund our education. So, thank you.
Thank you, Michaela, for your heartfelt words. Rene Reese, faculty member, is next, and I invite him to say a few words.
So I started teaching at Fitchburg State University about 20 years ago in the fall of 2000. And one of the things that has stuck with me about that first semester was a student that I had in my History of Mexico class. I'll call him Bill just to preserve his anonymity. But the thing that I remember about Bill was that most classes he had trouble keeping his head up, and he was always sort of falling asleep and nodding. But when he was awake, he was very polite, he was attentive, and he did what he could to participate in the class. So I didn't give him, I figured I wouldn't give him a hard time. One day after class, Bill came up to me and he said, "Dr. Reese, I think I need to apologize to you about how I'm always nodding off in the back of the class." And I said, "Yeah, I noticed. But you know, you don't owe me an explanation." But he insisted, and he said that he worked the graveyard shift at UPS 5 nights a week. And so by the time he got to my 2 o'clock class every day, he'd already been up for 16 hours. This was one of my earliest glimpses into the real life of a student at Fitchburg State University. It obviously shocked me to hear about this, and that's part of why I always remember Bill, the student I had in the History of Mexico class. The good news is that Fitchburg State University has always welcomed students like Bill, first-generation students who are paying their own way to go through college. And as an institution, I do think it's fair to say we strive harder than ever to help underprivileged students succeed. The bad news is, as we've been seeing, it's become harder and harder for students like Bill to pay for their education at our institution. And that's because, as we've seen, the cost of an education at every public higher education institution in this state, in this Commonwealth, has increased significantly over the years. Since 2001, tuition and fees at Massachusetts state universities have more than doubled. And the thing is, it's one thing, to say that in an intellectual way, and it's another to see in the faces of our students, in the lives of our students, what that really means. It means that we have students who are working 20, 30, 40 hours a week to pay for their education. Based on survey data, we know that the vast majority of our students, roughly 60%, expect to work 11 or more hours per week in order to afford their education. Roughly 1 in 6 expect to work 21 hours or more per week in order to fund their education. This tremendous increase in the cost of public higher ed, of course, translates not just into increased workloads, as we've seen, but looking at the data that Michael showed us, it means that student debt has increased dramatically, right, from 17,000 to more than 30,000 in the past 15 years. So why has the cost of an education at Fitchburg State University increased so much? Well, obviously there's lots of factors that we could point to. It was, I'm trying to think who was speaking earlier. I think it was maybe Matt who mentioned inflation. There are many factors, but the one of the most significant is, of course, decreased state funding. I have to admit, I'm not even sure if it's appropriate anymore to speak about public higher education in the Commonwealth of Massachusetts. Once upon a time, the Commonwealth covered a majority of the cost of higher education at public institutions in this state. That's definitely not the case anymore. Today, by contrast, the Commonwealth funds barely a quarter of the budgets of its state universities. Per student, since 2001, state funding has dropped 31% when adjusted for inflation. As we saw, that's $4,000 less per student. Over the same period, again, when adjusted for inflation, the Commonwealth has reduced funding for scholarships by almost $50 million every single year. So can we really speak about public higher education in the Commonwealth of Massachusetts? Is it any wonder that our students have to work more hours, have to assume more debt to pay for their education? And so I want to leave you with this thought. It's time that we put an end to this situation. We need the Cherish Act. We need other similar measures to restore the public in public higher education in the Commonwealth. Thank you.
Thank you, Rene, for sharing your thoughts and your experiences with our students. Our last student speaker of the day is Alexander Ramos Jr., and now I invite him to share his story with us.
Thank you. My name is Alex Ramos Jr., and I'm a senior political science major and the current student trustee here on campus. And I rise today because every student in Massachusetts deserves access to the highest quality of public schools and colleges. A student taking out loans for Fitchburg State from their freshman year could borrow, that could accumulate up to over $30,000 in debt. And even though Fitchburg State is portrayed as affordable compared to other public state universities, what is affordable today is still expensive. I began my journey at Fitchburg State as a dual enrollment student where I only had to pay $2,400 each year. But when I was accepted as a full-time college student, that number flew up and skyrocketed over $12,000 in debt. And because being a first generation college student, my family could not afford to pay that out of pocket. So I had to get a job and work 20 to 30 hours a week in order to make a dent in my college expenses. And that still was not enough. And I had to apply for a loan to make up for those $1,000 that I was not able to pay. So my question is, how can colleges expect students to be involved on campus and pay for college expenses at the same time? Having two jobs, one on campus and one off campus, working 20 to 30 hours a week, being involved in student government, and being involved in these leadership programs and sitting on the board of trustees was a lot to handle for me, but I was able to do it. However, there are many students that are not that fortunate. A close friend of mine recently dropped out of Fitchburg State because he was overwhelmed with all the loans that he had to apply for. And this to me is strictly un-American because public colleges should not be a death sentence. A public college should be a gateway to make our dreams a reality. And this is why that in my next trustee meeting, I will make a motion for the board to pass a resolution urging the state legislature to fund a foundation budget that guarantees a future of a debt-free public higher education. So therefore, I ask this panel today to please support the Cherish Act because it is time that we fund our future. Thank you.
Thank you, Alex, for sharing your experiences and your rousing words, and thank you also for being a co-organizer of this event. Now I invite Max Page, Vice President of MTA, to share information about the Cherish Act and also tell us what we can do to support it.
Good afternoon, everyone. First, just a note of appreciation for you all being here and also for your words, the faculty and the students. Beautiful words, painful words in a lot of ways, but also what I hear underlying it is a deep dedication to the idea of this institution and all of public higher education. That's so important to keep in mind. Brief story, so I teach at UMass Amherst, one of our other public campuses, and I teach architectural history. And one of the buildings that we have there, maybe you've been there, the Fine Arts Center, like this. We have this gargantuan Fine Arts Center. And I actually grew up in Amherst. My dad taught at UMass as well, and I remember these buildings rising in the early 70s. And what they did at the Fine Arts Center, which is kind of at the entrance to campus, is they built the largest arts complex west of Boston, in all of New England, other than Boston. It's the largest arts complex in the 1970s. They built it for working class, middle class students who were graduating, as you just heard, debt-free at that time. It's an incredible statement of kind of the investment in the idea that a very high-quality, great public colleges and universities should be available to the regular people in the Commonwealth, and they should be able to graduate debt-free. Right? That is not that distant in our future. In fact, I think some of the data that Michael showed that all the way up through the 1980s, someone at UMass Amherst could work for 10 hours a week at a minimum wage job and still graduate debt-free. Since then, we have gone far off the rails, and now not only do we shackle you, all students I'm looking at, with this debt, which goes into your middle ages often, but what's one of the most tragic things to my mind is how it discourages people from even attending. So people wisely, rationally, young people say, well, why should I take that on for myself or my family? Young people who deserve and want an education aren't able to get that. Okay, this should make us outraged, right? We should be outraged at this. And I've said this before in other settings, anger is a dangerous emotion. It's going to be very destructive of other people and yourself. But sort of righteous outrage and with having a direction to use that rage to fix something is actually one of the most powerful emotions and forces there are. So you should be outraged not only by this inequity, by the disinvestment, by the exploitation of adjunct faculty, by the high debt put onto our students, but you should be doubly outraged that this is taking place in one of the wealthiest states in the entire nation. It's not like we can say, too bad we don't have any money in the Commonwealth. In fact, we have more really rich people than we've ever had in a long, long time. So this is not a state where we don't have the resources if we choose to use them for this purpose. So how did this happen? And I won't go into enormous detail. I will get to the Cherish Act, but how did this happen? The analogy I'd like you not to adopt, but is too often adopted, is that it's like the weather. Like, you know what, we were once at the lowest level of indebtedness, and I don't know, a storm came in, and we became a state with some of the greatest levels of debt. That's not the way it works, and you know that. It's not inevitable. It's not like you look on your weather app and you see something bad coming and say, get the umbrella out or get my overcoat on. These are choices made. These are choices made by us as voters, as legislators over time and generations, not these particular legislators, other legislators, but still, it's been made by many people who've said they are deeply dedicated to public education. So we really have to insist that has to change, right? So the weather, don't accept the weather metaphor. These are choices made, and we can undo those and choose to make different choices. Okay, the Cherish Act. Just to be clear what we're talking about, we are talking about, although it's called Fund Our Future, in some ways it's back to the future for the Cherish Act. We're simply saying we should return to the level of investment we used to make. In 2001, we used to spend on average, the state, used to invest $12,000 per student in educating that student, overall, on average across the system. Now we spend on average $8,000. The Cherish Act says over 5 years, we will return to that level of investment. And part of what that level of investment purchases, not only more faculty, better conditions for our adjunct faculty, better building conditions, it will also allow us to freeze any hike in tuition and fees. That's only the first step towards creating true debt-free public higher ed, but it's an important step. Each year the legislature invests enough money to get us back to that 2001 level, says the Cherish Act, all colleges, public colleges and universities will freeze their tuition and fee hikes. And that makes a big, big difference. A very simple concept, a good deal for the Commonwealth and for all of you in this room. So how are we going to win this? Very quickly, a few actions that I want you to be thinking about. First, showing up to this, showing legislators, supportive legislators that you're behind them is really, really important. But a few more dates to put on your schedule. April 30th, 10:30 a.m. at the State House is the hearing at which the Cherish Act will be heard by the Higher Ed Committee. That room needs to be packed. There needs to be not enough oxygen for anyone to breathe, and they're going to have to move us to a bigger auditorium, right? I mean, showing up on an event like that is crucial. It needs to be faculty, students, staff from across the system, okay? 10:30 a.m. at the State House, April 30th. The next date you should put on your calendar is the massive rally we are planning for the Promise Act and the Cherish Act, the whole Fund Our Future campaign, on May 16th. And it's going to start in the State House in the middle of the day, and it's going to build towards a massive rally outside the State House that afternoon at 5 p.m. So May 16th, everyone should be there, okay? And then finally and we're going to put a lot of information out there for you, which is to call, visit, text, send the carrier pigeon messages to your legislators. Thank the ones who are with us, urge them to make these two bills, Cherish Act and the Promise Act, both, top priority when they go have their private conversations with the leadership to say, in the budget, I want this to be a top priority. And those who are not yet with us, don't let them get out the door. Why? How could it be that you should be saying to them, you're not supporting these two crucial acts supporting public education? We have about 115 co-sponsors for the Cherish Act and the Promise Act. That's terrific, but there are 200 legislators. So where are the rest? And every one of them should have an answer. You should challenge them to provide an answer of why they are not yet supporting it. So those are the actions, April 30th, May 16th, and then relentless advocacy with the people who have the ability to make the choice this year to finally fund our future. Thanks.
Thank you, Max, for sharing your perspective and valuable information that can help us push for this act. It is now my pleasure to invite Representative Stephen Hay to the podium. Yeah, thank you.
Thank you. I've got a couple pages of notes I've taken here, and that's important because it means you folks have something to say, and we need to pay attention to that. I could talk to you today about higher education and the Cherish Act and the Promise Act from a lot of different perspectives, but I'll keep this brief and try to be succinct and clear. First off, I believe that the government's most fundamental responsibility they have to the residents of the state or this country is to provide education for everybody so that every single individual has the opportunity to get an education, without incurring the debt that is happening right now, because it is awful in so many ways. Young lady here talked about the fact of the worry and the stress from the debt that she's incurring. Well, you know, getting an education and doing well at college is hard enough. We don't need to increase that level of hardness, if that's a word, you know, by making everybody worry about the debts that they're going to incur. We talk about the debts that everybody gets when they get out and that they owe so much. Well, that affects our economy in a great way. So many of these people getting out of college, their student loan payment is so big that they can't afford to buy a house or buy a car or put money back into the economy because they're just barely getting by and having enough each month to make that payment. That's not healthy for them, and that's not healthy for your local economy. So we need to change that. If only the wealthy can afford an education, the economic gap in this country is only going to increase. And that's not good for anybody, and that's not right. And so we need to change that. I'm a big proponent of, and I am on the Higher Education Committee, and we have bills before us of making community colleges free in Massachusetts. And part of my thought behind that is, when I graduated from high school, which was a long, long time ago, that high school diploma really had some value. It separated you out from the individual that didn't have a high school diploma. Well, as somebody mentioned earlier, the percentage of jobs that are going to need an associate's degree now is just growing and growing and growing. So that the value of that high school education has really decreased. So if we're going to say that we value education and want everybody to have opportunity, we need to do something about that. And I think one of the first steps is making the AA degree free for everybody. And then what that does is if you get 2 years under your belt for free, and then you have to go on and you want to go and get your bachelor's and advance yourself, then you have only half the amount of time that you're responsible for paying for in taking loans. So it will decrease all of that. I love the young lady who started off by saying that we need to increase spending so that she can take her public speaking classes. You know, we do need to have a sense of humor about this, and that was good. Very important is it Max? What Max was talking about. He gave you those dates. You know, the legislature does respond to individuals into groups. And I can tell you, every day I open my email, and 2 or 3 times a day I open it, and each time there are anywhere from 100 to 250 emails in there. And I scroll right down, and I can tell you this. A whole bunch go over here, and the ones from constituents, and the ones that are individual things go here, and those are dealt with by myself and my aide before anything else is even looked at. So when you want to talk to your legislature by sending them an email, this is my advice. You can do a couple of things. One is, instead of getting a form email from 180 people, give me one that has 180 names on it. It has just as much value. It takes up a lot less of my time. But even beyond that is the individual ones. When I get an email that is written specifically from Alex, when it's written specifically from this gentleman, or specifically from that young lady, we read it, we pay attention, we look at what's happening. And that is the most important way to contact your representatives. I do want to make sure that everybody here understands. Somebody raised their hand who's not from the 3rd Worcester District, which is Fitchburg and part of Lunenburg. Young lady in the green, do you know who your representative is?
Yeah, it's the governor.
No, he's your United States Congressman. Who's your state representative? And you're from Massachusetts?
Where do you live?
Where do you live?
I live in Northborough.
You live in Northborough. Huh? Yeah, my guess is Kim Ferguson, probably. Each one of you needs to know that answer. Okay? Because each one of you can send something to me because I am the representative who has Fitchburg State University in my district. But I'm one guy. All the people in this room, you all have a guy or a woman, and you have a state senator. Okay? So every one of you needs to find out who your representative is, who your senator is, and contact them. Okay? Because it's on you. That's important. You know, we talk about the fact that, you know, the money has decreased. The Cherish Act, which I support wholeheartedly, I support the Promise Act also, is only the first step. But you got to take a first step. Okay? And if we can get the Cherish Act passed, real important, what Max was talking about is the fact that no increase in tuition and no increase in fees, you know, for a few years. Well, that helps everybody. That, you know, that lowers the amount of money that people need to pay, so it lowers the amount of money that the people need to borrow in order to get their education. You know, the gentleman who spoke, is it Michael? Or Matt? But, you know, Matt talked about the fact that, you know, how fortunate he is. And, you know, I'm very fortunate. I have 2 sons, and my wife and I could afford to help them with their education. But, you know, simply because you were born to parents who had something, or simply because you were born in this area or that zip code, or with this nationality or that religion, or that, none of that should matter. Okay? All of that goes out the window. Every single person should have the same ability and have the same right to get their education without being encumbered by debt that just smothers everybody. And the Cherish Act is the first step towards doing that, and we need to continue to do that. And once the Cherish Act passes, then we need to work on the free AA degrees, and we need to work on all of the other things to get funding up. He was very succinct when he said it's choices. And I'll tell you, as a legislator, we make choices every day. Okay? I was a city councilor in Fitchburg for 18 years, and I can tell you this, people would talk to me about Fitchburg and the roads. Well, we all know the roads are bad. You know, we live in New England, it's hilly, we have, I don't know, is it 280 miles of roads, something like that in Fitchburg? Yeah, you know, so there are a lot of roads. And people would talk to me about the roads, and I'd like to have all the roads be smooth. The mayor would like to have all the roads be smooth, but it's a matter of choices and some funding. So when I was in the city council, when it came to me, and the choice was doing the budget, was I going to put a teacher in a classroom, or a policeman or a fireman on the fire or police department, or fix part of the roads, and we can only fund 2 out of those 3 things, I'll drive around with the roads with potholes and go slow and learn where they are. Because education is that important. If we're going to make choices on how we're going to spend the revenue that we generate as a state, the very first thing we need to do is put it to education every single time and then figure out the other things. And so when the budget comes to us, I had what we call in the legislature, your 15 minutes last week. Every member of the House of Representatives gets 15 minutes with the chair of Ways and Means to pitch for your district. And people go in, they're going to ask about specific little projects that they want in their district. And I sat down, and he's a new chair of Ways and Means, and I'm a reasonably new member of the legislature. And I said to him that the 3 times I've been in, I said, I come in with a couple of requests, but my very first question is funding for education going to go up? And if they say yes, that's a good thing, that's a start. Then I encourage them to make it even more than what they're talking about. Because, you know, you only get so much of the pie, but the biggest piece of the pie needs to be education. And you guys need to make sure that all the legislators are on board with understanding that education is the #1 priority that we have. And so we need to increase the funding so that everybody has an opportunity. Thank you.
Thank you, Representative Hicks, for your support and your words. I next invite Taylor Landry, who will speak on behalf of Representative Natali Higgins, who couldn't be here today.
Thank you very much, everybody. I really appreciate you all being here, and I'll try to keep it short because I know we're getting into the evening and people have to leave, which I totally understand. My name is Taylor Landry, and I am the legislative aide to Representative Natali Higgins, who is responsible for the 4th Worcester District, which is just the city of Leominster, so we're very lucky. And I'm here just to represent her and tell you that she supports you, but I think that it's timely, and I'm going to really quickly share a little bit of my story, because not too long ago I was sitting in those seats and I was a student here at Fitchburg State University, and unfortunately I am what they now call a degreeless debtor. So I didn't graduate. I dropped out of Fitchburg State after a 1.5 years of education in the elementary education department, and I am now standing in front of you with $10,000 in student loan debt, which I am paying off income-based, and I'll be paying for the next, I think, 10 years, which is a little ridiculous, but regardless, that's what the system is. I'll also tell you that my boss, Representative Natali Higgins, she has her law degree and she's very proud of it, doesn't regret it for an instant, but she has about $120,000 in student debt, and it's now just exceeded her mortgage payment, which she brags about, but I don't think she should be bragging about that, regardless. Thank you all for being here. Thank you for the faculty and the staff for telling us about various things that they've experienced and the statistics and everything, and I would like to more importantly thank the students Tally, Matthew, Michaela, and Alex who came up here and shared their stories, because I feel you, and so does Natali. What Max Page had mentioned about your actions that we would recommend for you to do, very, very important. And I know that all of you lead very busy lives, so if you cannot make it on April 30th to the State House to share what little oxygen will be in that room, I strongly encourage you to write a letter of testimony to your state representative, to your state senator, and to the Committee on Public Higher Education to tell them why it's so important for them to support the Cherish Act. And that can be a simple 1 paragraph. Hello, my name is so-and-so. I have this much dollars in student debt, and you need to change that because there were decisions that were made and we need to change it back. And so if you need that information on who to send it to, go to malegislature.gov. We actually just won some kind of award for being the most up-to-date technology website. There you can also find who your state representative and your state senator is by your address. So you can both type in your home address or also an address of a school. So luckily you have your state representative Stephen Hay here, who represents Fitchburg. So he is here in support of, and that's fabulous. So yeah, I think that what Natali wanted me to share with you today was that she's with you on the Cherish Act, of course. She co-sponsored it. But there's a lot of other great legislation out there to support more affordable and accessible public higher education. One of those is the Student Loan Borrowers Bill of Rights, which she filed. The docket number is House H998. And then also she filed a bill for debt-free public higher education, which is H1221. And you can also find that at malegislature.gov. Again, thank you all for being here and sharing your story and supporting something that is so important to all of you and to myself. And I hope that you guys have a great evening. Thanks.
Can I make one more comment? I'll take it right from here, just something I forgot to mention. I think it's deplorable that the federal government makes money loaning money to students to get an education. They're making billions of dollars a year loaning money to students, and that is fundamentally wrong. That program should simply generate enough revenue to cover the cost of running it. And my guess is, I'm speculating these numbers, if you borrow $30,000, if you were paying a 0.25% in interest, you pay back $34,000, $35,000 instead of the 52 or the 54 that you do at the rates they have now. And the government should not be making money off of it. It should be a break-even endeavor so that more kids can get more money to help them with their education. Thank you. I'm sorry, it's just
Because he's so old.
Thank you, Taylor, and thank you, Representative Hay, for those words. I now invite Nolan King, who is going to speak on behalf of Representative Jonathan Zlotnick.
Doesn't matter where, both water. Hello, everybody. Like Taylor, I'm a legislative aide for State Representative Zlotnick. I'm Gardner. He is under the weather. He has the flu today, so he could not make it. So he sent me in his place specifically because this is a topic he cares a lot about. Both he and I both went to public state universities, and just for me to sit here and you hear all these facts, kind of, for lack of a better word, thrown out at you, and it's truly appalling. It almost seems like something like, how did it get to this point? And we are at that point. So, that being said, with the support of higher ed that he has, he serves on not the higher ed committee, but the regular education committee. And we spent all day Friday listening to countless testimonials from legislators, students, can go on down the line for the Promise Act. And, just to see the advocacy for a program like this is truly wonderful, and something that we both support. And I thank you all for coming out today. And like everyone said, contact your legislators. When they're not looking at the emails, I am, because that's my job. So chances are when there's nothing better to do in the office, we'll open the email. So like you said, don't do a form. Submit an email just from yourself to your legislator. We will answer. I feel like that's a common misconception. So, please reach out, please make your voices heard for making higher ed more affordable and making the debt less crippling later in life.
Thank you, Nolan. Our final speaker for the evening is Mayor Natali. So I'd like to do it.
Thanks, everybody. You guys get credit for this today? You get any credit for this? 3 credits? Dr. Lapidus just called me. He said you're all set. That's right. That's a laugh. Come on. Come on. Right. Good. My family, three of the members of my family, myself included, are products of public education, higher education. I graduated from Fitchburg State in 79. That's 1979. My wife has a bachelor's and a master's from here, as well as my daughter. So we know the value, certainly, of public higher education and the importance of Fitchburg State in the community that we live in today. Fitchburg State's the second largest employer in the city of Fitchburg, close second to the city itself. And there's no question, and I'm not going to belabor this, I'm the last speaker, and I know you folks want to get going, but we've certainly fallen behind. We know that. In line, this is probably the perfect storm situation to bring this up now with, I see Aiden Horgan in the audience. He's a member of the Fitchburg School Committee. The foundation budget for our schools hasn't changed since 1983. And what's going on with public higher education, as indicated by some of the people who spoke, has fallen behind as well. So clearly, what seems to be so counterintuitive, how well we stand nationally and internationally as a state with how we educate our people. And to have those results just flies in the face of the fact that we don't really fund at the levels that we should. So I see the importance of Fitchburg State University as a driver for economic development of my city. So that's what's important to me. And also, my job is to try and keep you all here when you graduate, after you graduate. Settle here. It's the place to live, work, and enjoy. So thank you, everyone. And we're going to be doing our best on our part. Certainly, legislative delegation has gotten the message, and I believe the Baker-Polito administration has heard it as well as the Speaker and the Senate President. So I think this is a good time to be bringing this issue up, and I think you're going to see some changes. Thank you.